Welcome to the second video of Talking Beef. This week we want to talk about grass-fed bulls. And why do we want to talk about grass-fed bulls? Because everything that we're doing and talking about is feeding back into what makes commercial producers more profitable. And so we need to talk about that part about the supply of bulls to commercial people. And I think it's all right to say that there's probably some concern in the industry about the number of bulls that are breaking down and the cost that is to commercial producers. So we're just going to run through a few things in relation to that. A little bit of history. I reckon about in 20 or 30 years ago, the realization came that we really had to stop feeding bulls, having multi-vendor sales, show sales, leading bulls around, because that had an effect on the survivability of the bulls and the number of calves they could get. So what evolved was having on-property sales with grass-fed bulls. So many studs around Australia have adopted that over time, which is fantastic. What also evolved was the evolution of EPDs or EBVs, performance figures. So that allowed us to work with the realization that what we need to get a picture of is what's the progeny of that bull going to be, not what does that bull look like. We need to know what's the progeny going to look like and how they're going to perform. And we get that with the figures. So again, with that focus on profitability of commercial producers, we know those 5 drivers are fertility, growth, feed conversion, muscle and marbling. So we needed to communicate to commercial producers the information that they needed and then put it in a package that was going to give them as many calves each year for as many years as possible. So we moved away from that feeding race, and you had all the animals that were up for sale in one management group on property, not having to be compared to others, and then provide that information. Now that is still a responsibility of seed stock producers to try and supply that, to provide the bull in its best health and best position with the most amount of information for the seed stock producer to purchase the bull that is best for their operation. So that raises the point, I guess, around a lot of seed stock producers say, but the commercial producers won't buy them unless they're fat. Well, that may be so. And to that part, I say to commercial producers, think about that. When you're going to buy bulls, think about what product's going to be best for you. Go to those places that have the product that will be best for you. And so there's a part of us talking to our clients and educating them in that area about saying, stop looking for those fat bulls, stop buying the fattest bull in the sale, look at the figures, the performance figures, and don't worry too much what the bull is like. So, moving on from that, where we do have this situation where, the majority of studs have gone over to this on-property sale, selling large numbers of bulls. There has been a bit of a feeding race, I think, that's evolving. I know that there's studs in the industry that send their bulls off to a feedlot and fatten them up, then bring them back to the farm and present them as grass-fed bulls. Now, I think it's worth calling that sort of stuff out. I understand how difficult it is when you are starting to sell large numbers of bulls to present grass-fed bulls en masse. Doesn't change the fact the best bull for a commercial producer to buy is one that has not been fed. So that's up to the seed stock industry. If you're selling lots of bulls and you can't feed them, then go and buy some more grass to feed them on. There is a lot of breakdowns, and I think that's something really interesting. I need to point out that the breakdown of bulls is entirely the responsibility of the seed stock industry. The seed stock industry should be paying for research to work out why that's happening and how we can find a better product or provide a better product to our clients. Looking into that world, just having a bit of a conversation about bull sales and how you sell your bulls. I'm just going to put it out there. I think the credit thing in bull sales is an absolute sham. If you are if one of your clients comes back to you and says this bull did not work, then give them their money back and give them the option to go somewhere else. Do not link the failure of your product to that client having to come back and purchase from you. I've heard of other stories. There's seed stock producers that are selling bulls in large numbers, getting their clients to purchase those groups of bulls outside the sale, but saying you have to buy a certain percentage in the sale. The price of the bulls outside the sale will be linked to the average price of the sale. So, you know, you're really using those people to make yourself more money, and rather than making the client, respecting the client and making them the highest priority and giving them the best deal that they possibly can. There's nothing wrong with auctions, that's cool, but I really think playing these games with commercial producers is pretty unfair. A quick little walk into the area of yearling bulls. You know, people can choose what bulls they buy, when and how, and seed stock producers can choose. I just need to pull all that back to that part that talks about the 5 profit drivers, which of number 1 is fertility. I'm fearful that yearling bulls may present a problem in their ability to get calves and their likelihood of breaking down. Now, I only say that from history also. There was a big wave of selling yearling bulls 30 years ago, 20 or 30 years ago, and it all stopped. And I've never been able to work out why. Not a lot of communication going on in the seed stock industry. Be very interesting for those studs to talk now. Why did they stop doing it? Anyway, we've got another wave coming now of yearling bulls. I just present the situation again that those yearling bulls, to get up to sale and look good, requires a lot of feeding, and I'm not sure that's the way that we want to go. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with getting a group of yearling bulls, purchasing them a good period of time before you join, and let them acclimatise to where you are, and then put them out for joining. That's fantastic. But this fear of young bulls being fed up to get them to look good enough to sell to consumers, and then asking them to take them home and, you know, be careful with them and don't put them to too many cows and all this sort of stuff. We just have to work out whose responsibility it is to provide the right product that's going to get the most amount of calves each year for the most amount of years. Now I'm going to go into a little bit of a scary area, just going to touch on showing, only just because it is linked to the whole story about grass-fed bulls. Now, the thing that worries me about showing is when we're talking about commercial producers, there's very little to do with showing that has anything to do with commercial producers. I think we've even got to the stage that not many commercial producers even go to the show. So why are those animals being shown? I understand for smaller studs, it's hard to promote your product and get the message out there. I would suggest to you that the amount of cost to your business of feeding an animal up and going to the show and doing all that sort of stuff, you could probably take a full page ad out in the Land or you know, whatever magazine to promote your product. It would be cheaper. So it's just showing is not about commercial producers, it's about seed stock producers. I think seed stock producers love going to shows and the social part, and that's great. It's just the product they're producing is not suitable for commercial producers. The more you feed it, the more you pretty it up, the less likely it is to get lots of calves each year for a number of years. We know the relationship between overfeeding and joint breakdown and feet, so it still amazes me that we still participate in this process. No figures provided to the one person who's standing in the middle of the ring making a decision of which animal is best just by looking at it. So he can't suss anything out about fertility. He can't suss anything about growth because they're all fed and it's a feeding race. He can't suss anything about feed efficiency. He can't suss anything about marbling, maybe a little bit in in muscle. So who's judging it, and how, and what criteria? So, you know, people can do what they like with their time, and it's really, really important to say that we've moved away from that as an industry enormously, and those who still support it, those who still judge in that situation, those still who promote it through their magazines and their newspapers, have a responsibility about how that's holding us back. The other part that scares me a little bit is that we're using that to educate our youth, and is that the right way for us to be teaching our youth how the beef industry works? I know for myself personally, having gone through that whole process, it took me about 20 years to unpack everything that I learnt through that process, to work out how to provide a product properly as a seed stock producer to commercial producers. So all I say in this sense, in relation to grass-fed bulls, seed stock producers need to supply grass-fed bulls with performance recorded information, have an independent structural assessment of all of those bulls so they're capable of going out and getting calves, and then a fertility test before they're sold. Then you'll be supplying the best product to commercial producers in a responsible way. Anyway, that's Talking Beef. I'm John Wright, and we'll see you next time.